win the elections, and we know none of us knew who they were, but they are Cuban trained, and they are, some of them are formerly the Shining Path people, and they lack government experience. So they think that by just saying we're going to socialize something, we're going to give the farmers power, we're going to get rid of imperialism and put the mines in the hands of good people, it will automatically happen. And it's like a few people who want to build a house, but they're not architects, they're not engineers. That's what's happening at this moment. Well, well, that's what we're going to also, I suppose, we'll be talking about. Globalization has changed the ways and means that you do things, and they don't know about the ways and means. They've never been on the political scene. They're absolutely new to the political scene, which is what gave them the power to win elections, because people wanted something new. But again, they wanted something new, but not unexperienced. And now we're finding out they're fully unexperienced. And all they have are ideologists who know how to communicate, but not how to make things work. That kind of thing.
And you're ready to go again?
Yes, I'm ready to go again, because once you've done one campaign, which is very tough going, especially in a developing country, because Peru has been deteriorating over last at least 10 years. It was very clear as soon as the elections had gone, and I had actually met the actual president, that it was probably not going to work. In the last 5 years, between 2016 and today, we have had four presidents, and 1, 2, 3 parliaments, because the system has collapsed, and we're not a parliamentary democracy. So it's been a total failure. That trend has continued now, because we'll probably be going for another presidential election. At least it's a strong possibility. And so from my point of view, the campaign just hasn't ended. I thought it had ended, and I started saying, okay, now I'm going to go back to do what I was always doing before. But everything indicates that so far, of all the parties that competed, we are the best seen according to polls and statistics. And I had at the beginning the idea, that given my age, the time had come to, retire, take a boat, take a trip, get on an airplane, go back and live in Switzerland or something like that. I have given Peru the best I can. And then a friend of mine came up and told me something that set my mind in order, which was, look, it's not that Peruvians have got to be grateful to you because you ran. You have to be grateful to them because they voted for you. Now, you can't just run away. So it's not that they owe you something. You owe them something. You want to go out and find out how the world really works, write another book, make experiments in the Middle East, but you can't do that. From their point of view, you ask them to trust you, so the game isn't over. You can't just leave. And so I would, if unless I'm defeated in a primary, or people change their minds and the polls change, I would probably run again. Yes.
That's fantastic. I must admire you. I must say, your addiction to your country is absolutely fantastic.
Well, it's not only that. It's also thinking about past presidents. Like, remember Charles de Gaulle? Charles de Gaulle had retired in Colombey, les deux églises, right? And he was with La Tante Louise, right, his wife. Then he got into power, created the Fifth Republic, right? And then when finally he left government, what did he do? He died. So one of the things that Boutros Ghali, remember the former Secretary General of the United Nations,
Yeah.
told Javier Pérez de Cuellar, who was the previous Secretary General of the United Nations that came from Peru, and who also ran for president. Pérez de Cuellar asked him, Boutros, should I run for president? And Boutros Ghali told him, his name was Xavier, and they spoke French. He said, Xavier, il faut le faire parce que ça vous maintient jeune. So it's not a totally generous thing. It also keeps adrenaline going. Keeps you, if I played golf, it could have been different. If I skied, it could have been different. But it is also, in a way, it gives you a goal in life, no? And that's important.
At least you look very young.
Well, thank you very much. I photograph very well. It's in the family. We age and photograph relatively better than we really look. Thank you for your compliments, David.
I was then asking what was the impact of globalization, especially on Peru, but also in general. And now I'm coming back 15 years later, and I would like to ask you what has changed in the globalization, first on the economical side, but then also on the political side.
Well, globalization obviously is a good thing. It is probably one of the. Excuse me.
I'm sorry, I have to look at you.
Sorry, I have to look at you. I forgot that.
Just one request, David. When Mr. De Soto, when you're doing the interview and Mrs. De Soto is talking, try not to react because we will hear everything you say. Okay? Is that okay?
What?
Er soll einfach aufpassen, dass alles, was ihr sagt, also irgendwelche Reaktionen wie Ja und Nein und so weiter, das hören wir, gell? Ihr müsst einfach. Ihr müsst ihn, genau, ihr müsst ihn, das braucht ihr nicht, aber ihr müsst ihn einfach sauber aussprechen lassen, bitte. Sonst habe ich ein Problem. Hm? Okay. Thank you very much. Okay, let's go.
Okay, we start again.
Stellst du die Frage nochmal, bitte?
Do you want me to answer directly? I remember the question.
We met 50 years ago, and I was asking you at that time what was the impact of globalization on the world economy and also specifically on the Peruvian economy. 15 years later, what has changed in globalization on the economical side and on the political side?
Right. Well, what has changed is that we have now an awareness that globalization is not, and its virtues are not accessible to everybody in the world in the same way. Remember that we always talked about the informal economy. We talked about the formal economy. The first being that economy that didn't have rules that were connected to the global system. They had local rules, but they were not connected to more global rules. And on the other hand, we have, of course, a formal society, which is like Switzerland, where your Landsgemeinde, your Vernehmlassungs, your referendums, your property rights, your capital market structure, all those things that are local are federally connected within the country and are connected globally to the rest of the world through international organizations, international conventions, etc. But what we have now seen is that what at least we've been talking about and what's in my books, etc., is that the characteristic of the majority of the world is that it is disconnected. It doesn't mean that they don't have watches. It doesn't mean that they don't have global positioning systems. It doesn't mean that they don't have automobiles. but it means that even their identities are not valuable at a global basis. For example, you can own a piece of land in Peru and you can sell it locally at a very low price, of course, because it can only have a value that's local. But you could not get credit from a bank that is 20 kilometers away because it's very local. So we are a little bit maybe where Switzerland was 150, 200 years ago, when actually you were probably the poorest country in the Western world. Lots of Swiss had to live a life as mercenaries. When you financed your tunnels in Switzerland to come across to each other, you had to finance yourself in Paris. You didn't have the credit markets in Zurich. So what has happened is since then you redid your constitution. By 1908 you had organized a civil code that worked, and you were able to bring four populations that are very unsimilar to each other: Germans and French and Italians and Romanches, all of which are very different characteristics and sometimes don't even really like each other and make jokes about each other, are all living within one system that is so well connected to the world that even international organizations want to be located in Switzerland. So we are somewhere in the 19th century where all of a sudden we are realizing that we have entrepreneurs, that we have people that want to westernize everywhere you go, from Vietnam to Peru. But when globalizing, we forgot that before you were able to globalize, you had world wars, you had international conventions from the Congress of Vienna, Westphalia, post-First World War, Second World War. You put the United Nations into place, World Health Organizations. And so what you have now, as a result of that, people understanding that you have to connect huge migrations that have taken place in the third world. Since the 1960s, people have been moving to the big cities or to the big mines or to the big petrol fields throughout the world, and they've lost their original localities, live now in cities like Lima, Arequipa, or Cairo, etc., but they don't own things in a way that they can use them for different means. In other words, I'm trying to think again of Switzerland. In Peru, we are like your old knives, right? In your old knives, you had one blade. And in Switzerland, I remember that one of the first presents that my parents gave me was a Victorinox knife that had 26 blades, scissors and stuff of the kind. You can do with something at least 26 things. You have an identity to get credit, you have an identity to make capital, you get an identity to get social services, you have an identity to look at the police. In my case, as a student in Switzerland, I had a permis de séjour to be able to live there. I have an identity to drive a car. I've got all sorts of things because you have at least 20 to 30 identities. Well, the problem in developing countries is we only have a local identity. So when globalization hit us, those like me, who have 26 blades of rights that are recognized abroad, have done very well. But 70% to 80% of my country, it's not that they're better, it's not that they're not better off, they are better off because at least they get some of it trickled down. But when COVID-19 came in, coronavirus, then the separation between those who are globalized and are prosperous and the poor who are not globalized became huge. So, for example, in my house, I must have here, 5, 6, 7 bedrooms. So if somebody gets sick of COVID and you have to isolate him, you put him to another room. But in most Peruvian homes, there's probably 1 to 2 bedrooms. and you've got something like 5, 7 family members, so they're dying like rabbits during a plague. And that has created a huge chasm in all developing countries, but very especially so in Peru, where due to inefficient governments over the last 10 years, the refusal to use the private sector to buy vaccines or generate them or distribute them, but count on a failed state to do them, has made that globalization now is a bad word because it's a word of discrimination. And so during the last years, we've sunk into lots of nationalism, lots of old arguments of Marx have come back about the fact that the division of classes is the ultimate cause of your unhappiness, as a result of which I would say that anti-globalization governments are probably becoming or anti-capitalist governments or anti-corporation arguments are gaining the upper hands or have gained the upper hands in many developing countries like mine. So globalization, in other words, David, is still a good thing. Of course it is. It's a division of labor. It is the bringing together of humanity above nationalism, above religions. It's a good thing. We know that to do anything, I mean, here I have my Swiss watch, and it's got 120 pieces, and some of the jewels come from Colombia, some of the steel comes from the Ruhr Valley, the copper comes from Peru, the zinc comes from here. It's good stuff. But for the moment, globalization is on the downside in political terms, though it's still indispensable and we have no other road to go. So we're probably going to spend a difficult next 5 to 10 years before we bring it all together again and we can talk without fear of being disregarded regarding globalization.
Do you think that globalization is not working really because it is based on Western values, on capitalistic values, and that these values are not shared by a large part of the world population?
I wouldn't say necessarily that, David, because globalization is not like Roman law. It doesn't have categories and clear definitions. It's a way of looking at things. So if you today look at, I don't know, how Japanese globalization or capitalism works, it's different than the Swiss one. If you look at it of how capitalism works in China, where there is a form of capitalism, it's also a very different. It's also a very different game, and it even comes into politics. For example, one of the things that I have to do is when I'm asked how should Peruvian democracy work, since I've lived in Switzerland such a long time, I tend to say, if I were to use the Swiss model, the Swiss values, I would say, well, look, what we need to do is the Swiss, we should have 7 presidents at the same time, the Conseil Fédéral, right? And we should have Landsgemeindes, all right? And consultation systems like referendums and Vernehmlassungs, and you will probably say, but therefore to do democracy, you have to be Swiss. No, we each have to adapt it to our own local standards and how to make them meet. And what I would therefore say is that it's not an issue of values. It's an issue of how what is successful worldwide gets local roots. Is to me the challenge. It's not, but you have it also in Switzerland. You've got a socialist party. You used to have I don't know if I remember because I've been out of touch with Switzerland for a long time, but you used to have the cooperatives that were mainly Catholic in Switzerland, subsidized one way or other by the state. And the people of La Migros didn't like those guys. And so you went back between a little bit more social, a little bit more cooperative, and a little bit more capitalist, and a little bit corporate. And that's part of capitalism. Capitalism doesn't mean that everybody's private and corporate. It means that you basically know how to store value over the long term, and that as opposed to the communist model, there is no recipe for it. Nobody ever drew the rules of capitalism. So I wouldn't say that it's a Western value, because we've learned to accept Chinese capitalism. We've learned to accept Singapore. It's very different. And we've learned, and we're on our way to getting more global. No, so I wouldn't think that culture gets in the way. And I think, by the way, Switzerland is a wonderful example of that, because you are a civilization. I mean, to me, there is a Swiss civilization. Germans are very different from French, and they're very different from Italians who sing opera. They're more freedom. And Germans are more disciplined, and the French have more flourish and prefer to go to Paris probably than to go to Zurich. But you are a civilization with different cultures. So I don't think cultures have to get in the way. What we have is a capitalist civilization. I think we can all live by it. It could be a hell of a lot better, but it's still the best thing we have.
We have to respect the values, the local values of these people. Is it possible then at a certain time to find common rules like WTO or whatever it is? Or does it take time and time and time, and it is always a very, I would say, shaky construction?
No, we're going to have difficulties, but let me tell you why it's impossible, why I think it is possibly impossible to not respect structures of company, shall we say, of the Western kind. Because what you now have, for example, if you consider that, say, Peru, let's take a concrete example, you've got communities and heads of communities. And within the communities, by the way, they have private property. You go to a Peruvian community and you say, I like that house, it's a communal house. It's not a communal house, it's a private house, all right? And you have a wife and you say, it's a collective wife. No. Wives are a bilateral relationship, okay? And if you have enterprises there, they're also private, etc. But the persons who have been respected to lead the communities, not the enterprises, but the communities, the heads of the communities, who are Indian chiefs, who are supreme guides, if you want to, go out and even get a Peruvian or a Swiss bank to give them credit, and they won't. Because they are not responsible or accountable in front of the law economically. They are political entities. And as political entities, they can come and go, and there's mafias and there's political deals which are completely different from the economics. And so I think there's no going back on that. We are just simply going to have to do that. And it should be, and it's been a slow process, but it will just simply have to be done, because that's the way the world, nobody decided it, but all the rules of the World Trade Organization, the chambers of commerce throughout the world. We've got, I believe Peru has now signed the equivalent to 3,300 treaties that relate to standards on how you measure things, the metrics, money, International Monetary Fund, etc. It's on its way. The system works, and we've simply got to get adapted to. We've got to get adapted to it, and there's just no other way. But everybody will be adapted to it in its own particular way, with its own cultural dimensions, but the standards are crucial. If I were to tell you at this moment, you want to buy my house here in Peru, or I want to buy your house in Switzerland, and I tell you, David, I'd be willing to sell you my house at about, I don't know, $10,000, the lote or the topo. You would say, what's a topo? What's a lote? We can't understand each other. It's as if I told you temperature and I said, as hot as a chili pepper. You'd say, look, is it 36 degrees? Is it 37 degrees? We have to speak the same language. There's no other way to understand each other. And if we don't do that, those who are able to speak globally will divide labor much easier, much better, as both Marx and Adam Smith said it, than those who don't. And those who are really globalized will continue to be stronger than those who are non-globalized. So the nature of globalization might become more inclusive, but there's no way around that, I think.
You said that people have to talk to each other, have to listen to each other to find a solution. But have you the feeling that it has developed in a positive way, or are people more reluctant than 15 years ago to listen to each other?
Yes, well, I think a lot of the result that there was a huge victory against communism, basically in the early 90s, 30 years ago, and some of it came already with Deng Xiaoping in the late 70s, in what refers to China, has meant that the communist system and socialist or other alternatives to the global ones just simply collapsed. Nobody collapsed them in particular. They just collapsed. They weren't able to compete. The Soviet Union broke into little pieces. Eastern Europe also emancipated itself. Has meant that everybody wants to go there. What has been frustrating, and today is frustrating for many people, is that it's not gone as fast and as deeply as we thought that it would go. And also, what we're finding out is that since we're talking about the need to democratize awareness and understanding, it's no longer clear whether everybody has understood that it's the legal system that is responsible for it, and what they do is attribute it to culture, or they attribute it to injustice. When I read people like the French economist Piketty, he is outraged by inequality and what globalization has brought along. But when you ask him how he would substitute it, he's really got no reply. And he's an intelligent man, and he's full of culture, and he's got statistics indicating that yes, the rich have gotten richer, the poor have also gotten richer, but not that rich. Okay, and not everybody knows economics. And if you're a proud father, you have to explain to your children why you've been unsuccessful and why you've given them such a bad, an unlikely promising future. I remember, as a matter of fact, that one of the things that I used to do in the past is that I was invited to every year have a debate in Holland with a minister called Prok, if I remember correctly, who was a minister of development. And I gave all the arguments you and I are talking about now, and he said, but you see, Mr. De Soto, what you don't understand, he said to me, is that every time you knock on the door of 5 out of 7 Dutch homes, there's one person living behind that door because of divorces, because of economic problems, of settlement. We have lost our sense of community and solidarity. And that leads to some of the highest suicides in the world, the highest drug problems in the world. So, okay, but you see, every Peruvian would prefer to be Dutch any day over being Peruvian in those circumstances. So obviously, capitalism has had, is having problems, but I would say they have to do with politics rather more than the economics. And there is no, if you get a Dutch socialist coming to this country and saying, don't get rich because you have got all your family together, this is good for you. Now, you may die like dogs during coronavirus, but it doesn't matter. You will die with solidarity. The Peruvians will go to Holland. So the history of the world hasn't stopped. I think globalization is the right road, but we've got to find our more humanitarian ways to deal with social cleavage. But we still have the right formula so far is still competition, not necessarily private property, but competition and individuality over other forms of association because it's what produces wealth. And wealth means you don't get so sick. I have, for example, my house here is made with artisans, rock, people who chisel rock. And it is made by carpenters, all right? And I have a group of 5 carpenters that occasionally I come to do another room or whatever it is. And in both cases, 5 carpenters, they're 5 brothers, and 5 masons to cut the stones. Okay, these are 2 companies that are informal, by the way. And in each of these 2 families, okay, of the 5 brothers, 2 have died of COVID in each family. And when I've said, now you've reported that, of course, to government, the reply is no, because government will want to incinerate them. That's going to cost taxes. I'm going to be identified. So we bury them on your own. So we, even though official statistics say that that Peru is probably at the end of the worst of all developing countries, the fact of the matter is we're probably even worse than the statistics say. So I still think that wealth and therefore the capacity to respond to hunger and sickness is still a more bigger problem than Dutchmen getting depressed and having to take drugs and living alone or whatever it is. I don't think, I admire the sensitivity of Europeans regarding developing countries, but going against globalization is not the reply. The reply is let's do globalization, but let's find new social ways of getting together. That, yes.
You said that competition is one of the keys, but when I'm coming back to I would say your most important project which you have, the property rights protection, which says that if you have your own property, you can go to the bank and you can raise money and you can become an entrepreneur and then you become competitive. To what extent do you think that this philosophy has had an impact worldwide on the countries, and especially in Peru?
Oh, well, it has had one, until just recently. The biggest problem the World Bank has and still has is called doing business and the titling programs. And both programs emanate from my organization, the Institute for Liberty and Democracy, and they recognize it. That's why every 2 years or so, I go out and either close the convention on property rights at the World Bank and other places. So it's gone pretty far. For example, in the case of Peru, it's always very hard to get the metrics, and nobody gives you money to measure. They give you money to do things, but not necessarily to measure. But for example, 25 years ago, when we began massively titling in Peru regarding property rights, women, I think, own 38%, we think, roughly. According to, I think it's to Harvard University or Princeton, 38% of property in Peru. Today, thanks to our measures, they owe 65%. So we've democratized it. It's hard to find a place in Peru that isn't titled. The titles are not global, unfortunately, because we only have authority to do it locally. But that's happened. So we've moved ahead. And wherever I go, you know, as you know, David, wherever I go, and I talk to heads of state all the time. I mean, I knock on a door. The only reason I don't knock on a door in Switzerland of a president because there's 7 of them, so I would have to knock on 7 doors. But I have equal access, so people are conscious of that. The problem is that we don't only want a title so that you know who owns what, but we basically want to connect that title to the global system so that it not only says what you own, but puts them in contact with Swiss Credit Bank, puts them in contact with Union Bank of Switzerland, or what used to be the Schweizerische Bankverein, old Volksbank. That hasn't happened yet. Because to do that, you need to have much better record-keeping system than we have now. It's not enough to have a title. What the bank is going to look at is the registry, the record-keeping system. And the record-keeping systems have been extremely slow to catch up, which is that's one of the reasons we are trying to work hard at introducing blockchain into property recording systems. Is one aspect of it. Secondly, it's very interesting, and it would be terrific if we could find a Swiss partner to do the following thing. If you think, for example, of Peru, which is probably one of the richest mining countries in the world. I mean, we're number 2 in silver. We're number 4, and in copper. We've probably got the highest lithium and purest lithium reserves of the world. We're finding out now we have uranium as all hell, and we're not even exploring very much. How is it that we have been able to fund things so far? Because we don't have the lots of money that you need to do massive or open pit mineralization process or even large infrastructures. Basically, it is like a passport. A property title says that you own something. But for me to be able to use that passport to go from Peru to Switzerland, I need to have a Swiss visa or a Schengen. And before I can get my Schengen, I have to answer more questions than what the Peruvian law requires that I ask. What am I doing regarding narco trafficking? Do I have debts? They have a whole bunch of series of visas attached to it. So if you think of a Peruvian title, a Chinese title of any country, Ghana, South Africa, or whatever, the issue is we are lacking the visas that allow you to go into the capital markets. How do those visas go? Well, you need, on the Peruvian side, various more identities, and we know exactly what they are, that allow you to go from, say we're going to Wall Street, from here to just south of Miami. But from then on, for that title to be able to cause confidence, trust in the Zurich market, in the New York market, we have to be able to get into the capital formation market. In the case of the United States, it means we have to comply with the Anti-Corruption Acts of 1933, 1934, and Sarbanes-Oxley, which are now widespread and are probably incorporated into Swiss law. In other words, when you go to the capital market, I do not take out anymore a Peruvian title, nor the visas. It's like an ice cube that has melted and now become liquid, and what I've got are documents that are underwritten by an underwriter, by a capital generator, and that have complied with a series of requests whose objective was never to validate property rights, but to protect the investor. And what people have not realized in the world is that the property right is at the origin of the credit and the capital, and that the world is divided into two types of lawyers. The Peruvian property lawyers, who have never gone to Wall Street, and the Wall Street lawyers who have never traveled to see a Peruvian community. Now you're telling me, how can you do that? Well, the world is full of relationships that are invisible. So when Europeans were traveling, and the Dutch who went back and forth to Indonesia, etc., they were using brújulas, how do you say, compasses, which always pointed north, right? And it took Europeans 1,000 years to find out that the reason that the compasses pointed north was because the North Pole was a center of magnetics. So what Europeans should know by now is that the fact that you don't understand why something works doesn't mean that it's not useful. So what we need to do between a Swiss institution and a Peruvian institution, and we're ready to do it, is explain how it is that a Peruvian title will generate capital. At the end, if you think about the United States, for example, only 6% of money is issued by the Federal Reserve. 94% is by private banks on the basis of a group of documents that produce trust at home and in the financial markets, that through a window is received by a Swiss bank, and then it issues rights which allow you then to have funds. So what am I trying to tell you? What am I trying to tell you by this? It is, because it also relates to your previous question about capitalism. Capitalism is like compasses. Everybody knows how to operate it. We know how to operate it. But we guys who believe in capitalism, whatever sort, left, social, democratic, doesn't matter, conservative, we don't really know why it works. And that's the reason why you Europeans have colonized Africa, the Middle East, and Asia, and they're still not rich. Because you know how to get rich, but you don't know the formula of how you got rich. It's been a silent process. And what you're making me think is that it's still a good process, but the problem about the West is it doesn't know why it really got rich, and so it takes it for granted. So they keep on telling us you must be more Protestant, you must be more Catholic, you must learn to respect laws, you must eat more cheese, you must get vaccinated more frequently, whatever you want to do it. It's not that. It's that we still have not understood the relationship between the local in developing countries and capital markets. And I think we're only inches away from doing that. I still have to find, probably with your exception, a Swiss banker that's interested in making that connection.
Another instrument is obviously microfinance to fight poverty. We discussed it 15 years ago, and you said it is an interesting instrument. So how has it developed, and has it brought, was it up to the expectations?
Well, what I like about microcredit is that it is one way of getting to the solution. I mean, first of all, it is that people do want credit. And the fact that you adjust to help poor people is good. And in the process, we're going to learn. So I have no criticism of microcredit. What I do not like is when people say in Peru, our people are ready for microcredit and nothing more. It's a little bit like going to Ethiopia, and we see Nubian children or Afro children, small, skinny, undernourished, and we say we should give you little pants and little shirts because you're a dwarf, you are condemned to be a pygmy for the rest of your life. So I think they can be just as big as we can, which doesn't mean you don't have microcredit. It just means that microcredit is still this much compared to macro credit, and it has created these enormous problems between rich and poor, and out comes Piketty and the rest, and who knows where it can take. In the case of Peru, we've elected, in a country that is not communist, we've elected a communist leader, not because he's a communist, but because he talks about injustice. Next thing, of course, is that when you look at the microcredits in Peru and what they actually mean on a yearly basis, we're talking about 130% interest rates. So so on the one hand, they don't have scale because the average company's got 8 people. They don't have scale. Everybody knows, whether you're Nestle, or your Volkswagen, you need scale. From Karl Marx to Adam Smith, they say you need scale, and we cannot deprive them of having scale. It doesn't mean everybody's got a big scale. I mean, you can have a Nestle, that's a large corporation, and lots of micro little people attached to it, but you've got to think big. So what I think is that microcredit is a step in the right direction. It alleviates, but it's not a final stop. People should be able to decide whether they want microcredit, macrocredit, and should be able to grow. I mean, in the case of Peru, let me give it to you this way. The guy who can get macro credit, because the Peruvian company is registered in Peru, but is also registered in the New York Stock Exchange, every time they see a small miner in Peru, a guy, that's got a mule, a pick, and an axe, and 7 people, and they're exploring gold, they're exploring gems, whatever it is, every time they find something, they go to bank and say, can I get some credit? Here's micro for you. But the big company goes out and buys the mine. And they become the servants of the big company. And then you produce a social explosion. So the general idea is that not everybody's macro, but everybody should have the right to be macro, not only micro.
I would like to ask you a last question about the players. For the economical development of the world, there are players. There are private players, investors, there are NGOs, there are FMI, FME, and all these official organizations. Who has to play which role?
Well, it's a very hard question to answer, because I haven't really studied it in a macro section. It's the result of my experience, if you want to. Generally speaking, those who are interested in the plight of the poor, in the drama of being poverty, tend to think left. It's a fact. And they have a general bias against capitalism. So, for example, and on the other hand, if you are right, pro-capitalist, etc., these people will want to push enterprise as well, but they don't know how to deal with communities and poor people. So regarding the problems that I'm interested in, if I go, for example, to see Swiss federal funds, and I say I want to help poor people also become capitalist, I'm not going to get 1 franc, 1 centime. They'll never say it, but they don't like rich people. And they don't like large Swiss corporations. They really don't like them. Now, if you go and talk to the rich, they will believe that they're rich because they're Zwingli, they're Calvinists, or they're disciplined Switzers, and they've got a language that is so rich, the German language, compared to Spanish, which is half the vocabulary that you do, simply because we have to go through the Royal Academy of Spanish Language to even create a word. So it's full of bureaucratics. their tendency will be to think that it's only education, etc., when it's the legal system. And if you talk to lawyers, it gets worse, because a property lawyer is in the real estate business. And a financial lawyer doesn't think in terms of property law. He thinks in terms of security. So we're missing, I think, because I'm trying to see what's behind your question, David. I think that we are missing, that we've over-specialized this way, shall we say. We've over-specialized. I went to school, as you know, in Switzerland. I went to University of Geneva, the Faculté de Sciences Économiques, and then to the Institut Universitaire de Haute Étude Internationale. And what I found so enlightening about it is nobody tried to teach me a mixture of these things. I was taught law, on one hand, by great Swiss jurists, Lalive et Budin, kind of people, my friend Michael Schneider. I was taught by big Swiss brains on it. And regarding economics, I was taught by people like Wilhelm Röpke, who invented, the social market economy, etc. And the reason I decided to do that rather than pure economics, just law and economics on the other side, is because I believe that each of them had part of the formula. So somehow or other, by specializing people in law, and in law, the difference between property law and financial law, and on the other hand, people in finance versus real estate lawyers, which has worked well for the West, we've lost the root of all of this, which is that legal law is intertwined with economics procedures in all Western countries in a manner that cannot be devised just through sheer philosophy, like law and economics, and it cannot be picked up by the Piketty's either. We have to look at concrete cases of why it is that a Peruvian Indian sitting on top of a uranium deposit or a lithium deposit or a gold deposit cannot go to the capital markets. He cannot. And that people will say he shouldn't, whether they're for microcredit, whether the Swiss government, or whether the private sector. We've got to find a middle ground. And I really don't know, David, where it is. I believe that it will be the result eventually of 2, 3, 4 people putting money to work in that sense. And it's like a bridge. I think what I've seen that's been happening over the last 15 years since you asked it is that that bridge has begun on both sides, and we're just a few meters from making it connect. And if there's one thing that's good about the coronavirus, unfortunately, or the COVID-19, call it what you will, is that the crisis is what will take us to a good port. We must not waste this crisis. It's a very good moment to find out why we're having all these different social wars, these huge clashes between left and right in just about every country. But I don't know, regarding these players, which of them will do it. Maybe it'll end up being an engineer. I don't know. But somehow or other, we've got to understand that globalization works, but it has not reached more than 30% of the world population. Very simple. 7.5 billion people in the world. Europe is somewhere between 350 million. The United States about 350 million. 350 billion. No, excuse me. 350 million, 350 million. I'll give you Japan for credit, and Singapore if you want to for credit. I'll put in Shanghai, Beijing, etc. It's not more than 3-4 billion people who are globalized. And the rest of the 5 or 4 are outside the system, in spite of the fact that we all have automobiles and motorcycles. The possibilities of some, look at the way rich people have gotten rich so much faster. And that means that the capitalist system, which I believe in, has got to be modified to be able to suit things, but not by going back to the past, to an Inca socialist past. That failed, that was defeated. We need change, but it's a change going forward. And maybe in that sense, it's the people who manage wealth in the West who are possibly those, I wouldn't say responsible for our delays, but are those who are in the best position to understand what makes wealth happen and to sink resources, people who think, right, into it. I also think it has a lot to do with the way, talking to my Swiss friends, and I think Switzerland has a special responsibility simply because of the way they're located. You are a rich capitalist country, but you're different from the United States because you do it on the basis of Roman law. You have statutory law in your country, like we do here. While the Americans and the Anglo-Saxons have got common law, which is judge-made law. So of course they don't know how they got there. They just got there because the system allowed them to get there, accidents. But in Roman law, you have to be deliberate. So you Swiss went out, copied the US Constitution. You found ways, along with the Germans, to adjust a statutory system like the Roman law system to the initial workings of capitalism. So you're in a very good position, in a better position to understand what it is that you did to get there than the Anglo-Saxons. So to answer the question with a commercial, David, let's say the following thing. I think that within all the players, the Swiss have a special responsibility because they know Roman law, they know how to get four cultures together, they know how to get there, and it was done by Swiss financiers and especially the University of Bern. Everybody's forgotten about it, but I studied it somewhat. And on top of that, you all speak Latin. And it just so happens that all statutory law, all law in developing countries is statutory. I don't care what they say, no, there's common law. Bullshit. It's statutory law. It's not judge-made law. So you've got a role to play. But you have to convince your public authorities.
I understand you, but I have the feeling that in Switzerland we have much smaller problems to solve right now. We are discussing whether we should have a paper showing that we are vaccinated and things like that. And this is the big issue. And the real big issue in Switzerland, I must say, is going to disappear more and more, unfortunately.
Can I ask you a question, David, in that connection? If I'm not mistaken, in terms of real wealth, you're still the richest country in the world?
Yeah, one of them, certainly.
What problems are you talking about? I mean, peanuts. You don't have problems. Everybody's got problems. You don't have problems. What I'm trying to say is I'm not saying that Switzerland's perfect. I'm not saying even that the Swiss model is a model for the rest of the world. I mean, try and get 7 presidents together in a Latin American country is going to be very hard. But what I'm saying is that you are in a cultural position to understand the world much better. Among other things, is because you got no colonies. So you also...
But finally, if you're looking back at the last 15 years, are you satisfied with the development of the world economy or not?
No, of course I cannot be satisfied with a system that's left 70% of the problem of the population behind. It's not that there hasn't been progress. It's just that, as usual, peace depends not on everybody being a little bit better, but it also depends on equality of opportunity. When I've worked in India as advisor to a person who was going to become prime minister, I remember you could go to a department, or I forget what they called them, a province, whatever it is. We had 100 million people, and they were all poor, and there was no violence because they were all poor. And then you go to a place where there's some people that are getting richer and others not, and there's violence. So obviously, equality, distance between some and others, is at the root of many of the problems we face today. And so the idea is not to make everybody equal, if you want to, but give them an equal opportunity. In that sense, I am not satisfied, because in this country we defeated the Shining Path as a terrorist movement. We're the last country in the world to have fought back a terrorist system. We lost nearly 100,000 lives with no military support from the West. We did it on our own. We did it very intelligently. And look where we are. 30 or 25 years later, they've come back. And the reason they've come back is not because communist theories work any better, but the reason they've come back is because the capitalist system opens up a whole new world. But if you don't manage it likely, you can go back. There is nothing that indicates that once you are wealthy, you can't go back. On the contrary, if you look at the history of the world, for over 2,000 years, you can lose predominance and wealth. So to answer your brief question with a brief answer, which is very hard for a Latin American like myself, is I am unsatisfied.
It was very, very interesting. And now I must say I would like to congratulate you that you are doing so much for your country, and that you are even ready to go a step forward. I think that's fantastic. And this means also for me that probably I won't meet you in Switzerland.
Well, no, I love going back to, I'd love going back to Switzerland and traveling, there, but let's find a way of, because there you are yourself, you're still on your battle horse, trying to do the right things. Find an opportunity. I'd be delighted to come back in Switzerland. I've lived in Switzerland, I don't know, 35 years. So somewhere in me, there's a petit Suisse Toto, right? I write on squared paper, and I'm trying to think what other Swiss qualities I have. I'm focused, okay? I'm focused. And I miss Switzerland, so I'm delighted to, and I enjoyed very much our conversations of 15 years ago and also this one. So whenever the occasion occurs, I would love to come back and see you, David, and revisit my old haunts in your wonderful country.
Are you coming to Davos?
No, they've stopped inviting me. It's an expensive venture, but they've stopped it. They used to invite me, and so I used to go all the time, but I think it's the entrance fee. Good. Inequality. They're not inviting me to Davos, but I'd love to go back. Get me in, David.
So we have to find another solution.
We have to find another solution.
Okay, thank you very much. It was really pleasure and very interesting to listen to you, and I hope that I will be able to carry forward some of your messages to this German TV, which is finally one of the C's of this movie. And I will also try to make a video book out of these movies, which will be available to everybody, showing how the globalization has developed over the last 15 years. And it is available to schools, to persons interested, and so on and so on. And that would be great. You're certainly going to play a big role there.
Well, I thank you very much, David. I also congratulate you on your efforts and your work to make the world more more understandable, and I certainly hope our paths cross again. And thank you for giving me this opportunity. You know, if this interview is successful, as everybody says, you not only need to go to good, you're as good as your interviewer. So it's been a pleasure being with you, David.
Thank you very much. Thank you. Goodbye.
Okay, thank you, David. Thank you.
Thank you.
It's 5:25.
Ja, Heiko,
Ja, danke, macht's gut. Gell?
wir hängen gleich auf, damit ihr weitermachen könnt. Ja?
Okay, ja, ist gut. Ist gut.
Okay.
Danke.
Bestens, tschüss.
Tschüss. Goodbye. Talk.
Auf Wiedersehen.
Auf Wiedersehen.
The final cup first, the final
Ideally, I've got about 15 minutes because I have a TV interview that just arose now.
I understand. We will not do the garden thing.
No, if we can forget that, that would be terrific. Thank
It's
you.
already forgotten.
Thank you.
Yeah, we do this last clap. Could you do me one last favor and just get up and sit down again? This is what we do with
Sure.
all the
Sure.
cut, yeah.
Okay, so you want me to come here?
Yeah, just behind the camera, and then you can
Okay.
sit down.